Welcome to the channel, everyone, and this is Let's Play MTG. And here on this channel, we will abilities twice, use Electrostatic Plumber, and so you don't necessarily need to have. Hey guys, it's Anthony Lee with Let's Play MTG, and today we have another great episode of a Commander deck tech. In this deck, I'm going to show you all about Centaurs and how Centaurs can be quite an awesome concept for a tribal Commander deck. Now, of course, this is not CEDH, it's more of a casual game, so the game will last a little bit longer. But something I really like about this deck is using the mechanic Populate. I think Populate is a very underrated or overlooked kind of mechanic where you create a copy of a token copy of a token that you already have that's a creature, which I think is actually pretty cool. And of course, there's also token doublers and stuff like that that you'll see in the deck. But Centaurs are a half horse, half human kind of creature where the legs and the main body of a horse, and then basically where the neck of the horse would be from the torso up to the head of a man or a woman. As you can see in this picture here, I drew several years ago in a fantasy-based cartoon of a centaur. Kind of went into my own made-up world where I designed several fantasy-based or mythological creatures. But anyway, back to Magic the Gathering in the deck. I will definitely break down all the different parts of this deck and let you see the very unique style of a green and white Centaur tribal deck with really focusing heavy on the mechanic of Populate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into the video. Hey guys. Alright, now getting on, we're onto this video. We're actually going to start with the creatures of the deck. I know my my last deck tech video with the mono green worm tribal deck, I kind of put the creatures off to the end, and in this case, a lot of people want to see the creatures that make up the tribal aspect of a deck. So this video and for future deck tech videos of commander decks, I definitely want to showcase the creatures first, and then other cards that help support whatever mechanics or tribal type synergistic cards go in the deck after that. So let's go ahead and start onto the creatures. So the first creature we have is Fresben Trumpeter. Fresbrand Trumpeter has inspired. Whenever Fresben Trumpeter becomes untapped, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you attack one turn and then untap it on your untap step, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, so it will naturally get stronger every turn as long as it untaps during your untap step. Next up, we have the Wild Wood Patrol. Wild Wood Patrol is a creature, 2 and a green, trample, and it's a 4/2, so it's for the most part a pretty vanilla type creature. Next up, we have Nalia's Huntmaster, creature Centaur Shaman, 3 and a green for a 4/3. Whenever Nalia's Huntmaster enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is your devotion to green. So the more creatures and various other permanents you have with a green mana symbol, increase your devotion, and thus that could get better, especially later on in the game. Next up, we have Centaur Safeguard. Centaur Safeguard is a Centaur warrior for 2 and a hybrid of green-white for a 3/1 creature. Whenever Centaur Safeguard is put into a graveyard from play, you may gain 3 life. Next up after that, we have Phantom Centaur. It's a Centaur Spirit for 2 and 2 green. And it is a 2/0 creature, so definitely be careful on this creature. Protection from black. And then Phantom Centaur comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters. Now, if something prevents you from getting any kind of +1/+1 counters, this will enter the battlefield, but it will then die immediately. And then if damage would be dealt to Phantom Centaur, prevent that damage and remove a +1/+1 counter from it. So it eventually could die. Next up we have Courser of Krufix. It's an enchantment creature centaur for 1 and 2 green. It is a 2/4 creature, and the enchantment creature can make a huge difference in a card I'm actually going to talk about later on. A lot of these enchantment creatures or enchantment creature tokens that are made in the deck are really important for one specific card to be able to become very good in this deck. So this card says, play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library if it is a land. Now, it still does have you do the 1 land per turn. That land is being played, whether it's from your hand or the top of your library, it still counts towards your 1 land per turn. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, gain 1 life. Next card up we have is Chronicler of Heroes. It's a Centaur Wizard for 1, a green and a white for a 3/3 creature. When Chronicler of Heroes enters the battlefield, draw a card if you control a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this deck does have a variety of cards that do help give +1/+1 counters. So you usually being able to get that effect off. Next up, we have Centaur Omen Reader. Centaur Omen Reader is actually a pretty cool card. It is a snow creature Centaur Shaman. It costs 3 and a green for a 3/3. As long as Centaur Omen Reader is tapped, creature spells you play cost 2 less to play. So this can actually be really interesting because your second main phase, typically you may have already attacked with this. And because it taps to attack, and it doesn't have vigilance, it's able to help you save your mana and possibly be able to play more spells. Next up on the list, we have Croson Druid. It's a creature Centaur Druid, 2 and a green for a 2/3 creature. It has kicker, 4 and a green. When Croson Druid enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain 10 life. So it is actually a significant amount of life gain for this creature. Next up, we have Lagana Bane Storyteller. It is a creature Centaur Advisor for 3 and a white. It's a 3/4 and says, whenever Lagana Bane Storyteller enters the battlefield, you may put target enchantment card from your graveyard to the top of your library. If you do, you gain life equal to its converted mana cost. So any of your enchantment creatures, this effect can go ahead and target those enchantment creatures, as well as any other enchantments, which this deck does have a good number of. Next up, we're going to look at Spellbane Centaur. Spellbane Centaur is a creature Centaur for 2 and a green for a 3/2 creature, and creatures you control can't be the target of blue spells or abilities from blue sources. So it basically has hexproof from blue. Next up, we have Fresbrand Warchief. It's a Centaur Warrior for 3 and a green for a 3/3. It has Vigilance and Trample, which are always nice to go together, and other Centaur creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Vigilance and Trample. So this doesn't need to do anything special. As long as it's on the battlefield, your other creature Centaurs get +1/+1 and Vigilance as well as Trample. Next up on the list, we have Herald of the Pantheon, Centaur Shaman for 1 and a green for a 2/2. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life. So definitely a really big synergistic type theme going on with enchantments and enchantment creatures and different ways to recur things. So I definitely do like about how centaurs really help with enchantments because I love playing enchantments. Creature heavy, enchantment heavy, typically not too much interaction. Typically it's like a sorcery speed type decks for the most part, but I really love like it's my turn, I build up, and then I go to battle. So I definitely do like that aspect of more synergies with my enchantments with this tribal deck. Next up, we have Looming Shaman. Centaur Shaman, 2 and a green for a 3/2. When Looming Shaman enters the battlefield, target player shuffles any number of target cards from their graveyard into the library. Typically, choose yourself. Unless you have someone with graveyard recursion, but at the same time, they would get to choose what cards go into their library and which ones get to stay. So typically, it's pretty advantageous for you to be the target, to then shuffle all your graveyard into your library. Next up, we have the beast of the centaurs, the kingpin, the top of the top, the best of the best for the centaurs, and that is Stonehoof Chieftain. Stonehoof Chieftain is a centaur warrior, costs 7 and a green. It has trample and indestructible. Whenever another creature you control attacks, it gains trample and indestructible till end of turn, and it is an 8/8 creature, so it is a big beefy guy. Or woman. It has indestructible and trample. That's crazy. Those are 2 very good things to go together. But then it gives everything else that's attacking, and it doesn't even need to attack to do this, but it gives everything else indestructible and trample when your stuff attacks. That's awesome. That can literally change the game. Once this guy is out, you can make a huge difference in the game. So next up, we have the Centaur Nurturer. It's a Centaur Druid for 3 and a green for a 2/4. When Centaur Nurturer enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, so that's just nice to just put the gravy right on top and gain 3 life when it enters battlefield, and then it taps to add 1 mana of any color. So hey, you're running low on mana, you got a 2/4 body out there, and now you can tap it for mana, and hey, it definitely helps. Alright, next up we have Battlefield Scourger, or Scrounger, sorry. Centaur, 3 and 2 green for a 3/3, so a little on the heavy side. It has Threshold. Put 3 cards from your graveyard onto the bottom of your library. Battlefield Scourger gets +3/+3 till end of turn. Play this ability only once each turn. So you can, for every 3 cards that you put from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, it gets +3/+3. So this can slowly sweep those cards from your graveyard back into your library, kind of like the Looming Shaman. Conclave Mentor. Centaur Cleric for a green and a white for a 2/2. Every 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control. That many +1/+1 counters are put onto that creature instead. And when Conclave Mentor dies, you gain life equal to its power. So this is basically like Hardened Scales on a stick. To be able to have that ability of Hardened Scales, and then of course it has a minor amount of life gain. Yes, life gain. Sorry. But yes, this is a pretty good card. It helps with the +1/+1 counters on your creatures, which it can be nice. It makes them even stronger. If you get the Centaur Chieftain out, or the Stonehoof Chieftain out, and your creatures are even bigger with trample and indestructible, things can get out of hand really fast. Alright, next up we have the Lagana Band Elder, Centaur Advisor, 2 and a white for a 3/2. When Lagana Band Elder enters the battlefield, if you control an enchantment, you gain 3 life. More than likely, we're going to already have an enchantment out, whether it be a creature enchantment or just a regular enchantment or even an enchantment aura. Alright, next up we have Nyx Herald. It's an enchantment creature Centaur Shaman for 2 and a green for a 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target enchanted creature or enchantment creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains trample till end of turn. So again, being able to beef up your creatures and give trample is awesome, and it definitely helps all your creatures just go wide, go tall, and just tidal wave over everybody. So I love that. Next up, we have a pretty simple centaur. It is Leaf Dancer. Leaf Dancer is a centaur for 1 and 2 green for a 2/2 and has Forest Walk. So if someone else has a forest, it's unblockable, and so you might be able to just make this one go tall and swing. So yeah, it's a nice little vanilla creature in there that could become devastating against the right opponent. Next up, we have the Centaur Cursor, Centaur Warrior for 2 and a green for a 3/3, and this is basically a bear. It's a 3/3 for 3, kind of like a 2/2 for 2. No effects. It's about as vanilla as you can get. Pretty straightforward on that one. Next up, we have Dowsing Shaman. It's a Centaur Shaman for 4 and a green, so one of the more expensive centaurs, mana cost wise. For 2 and a green and tap, return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, and it is a 3/4 creature. So again, there's a lot of synergies with enchantments. Next up, we have Nylea's Disciple. Nylea's Disciple is a Centaur Archer for 2 and 2 green for a 3/3. When Nylea's Disciple enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to your devotion to green. So as you can also see after going through several of these creatures, not only is there a lot of stuff with enchantments, but there's also some life gain aspect. And then the last creature for the main block of creatures. Now, some of the creatures have been put into other categories that you'll see later on, so it's not all the creatures overall in the deck, but for the main group of creatures that doesn't usually really fit in these other categories, and that would be Centaur Rootcaster. Centaur Rootcaster is a Centaur Druid for 3 and a green for a 2/2. Whenever Centaur Rootcaster deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a basic land card and put that card into play tapped. If you do, shuffle your library. This is one with nature on a stick, so definitely a good kind of ramp, and that will help lead us to the next section. Alright everybody, in this section we're going to go ahead and go over the ramp. Now ramp, if you're not familiar, is cards that help you get additional resources or mana on the battlefield more than your normal 1 land per turn. So if on turn 1 I'm able to wind up with 3 mana, then I've ramped. If by turn 4 I have more than 4 mana by other cards that I play, by getting additional lands or being able to produce more mana than just 4, then I am ramping. So, looking at ramp, the first card, and the reason, or most likely the reason why it's called ramp, is from this card itself, Rampant Growth. Rampant Growth is a sorcery for 1 and a green that says search your library for a basic land card and put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Next up, we have Moss Diamond. Moss Diamond's an artifact that costs 2 colorless. When it comes into play tapped, and tapped add green to your mana pool. Alright, and then the next one will be 3 Visits. It's a sorcery for 1 and a green. And it says search your library for a forest card, then put that card on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. This one does not enter the battlefield tapped. So when you go grab a forest, it comes on the battlefield. So this spell, the reason why it has retained a pretty good few dollar value is it basically only costs 1 to be able to get an additional land. So you're really not out as much mana. Going on to the next card, it is Fertile Ground. Fertile Ground is an enchantment aura for 1 and a green. Enchant land. When enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any color to his or her mana pool. So that helps you, especially for a multicolored deck, to have options of, okay, I have a forest. If I enchant a forest, now it can tap for its normal green, and it can also tap for white if you wanted to, or it can tap for 2 green. So it does have some versatility, especially when you start going into multicolored decks. Next up, we have the artifact of Arcane Signet. Arcane Signet is an artifact that costs 2 that says tap, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Alright, and next up we have New Horizons Enchantment Aura for 2 and a green. You enchant a land, and New Horizons enters the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And then enchanted land has tap, add 2 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool. So now, instead of just saying tap for green, the land taps for 2 of any 1 color. So you can't say I want a green and I want a white. It has to be like 2 green or 2 white. Next up, super iconic card that some people want banned, some people like it. I tend to like the card just to help build that possible speed, but at the same time sometimes make myself a target. So I could see the argument on both sides of the like and dislike of Sol Ring, especially in the casual format. It is Sol Ring. Sol Ring is an artifact that costs 1, tap to add 2. So you net 1 mana out of that. So the next card is it's a creature card that I really wanted to let you know was so good in this deck because of the enchantment creatures and the number of enchantments that are in this deck to make this card just amazing, and definitely an auto include in this type of deck. And that is Sanctum Weaver. Sanctum Weaver is awesome. Sanctum Weaver is an enchantment creature dryad that costs 1 and a green. And it says tap, add X mana of any 1 color where X is the number of enchantments you control, and for a 0/2 creature. This Modern Horizons 2 creature is phenomenal in this deck. And not only does it count itself because it's an enchantment creature, but when you have multiple enchantment creatures out and other enchantments, this thing can get crazy on how much mana that you can produce. So this is definitely an auto include, super good in the deck. My very last game that I played with it, it got so much value So I definitely love having this card in this deck. Alright, next up is one of my favorite cards in Commander. That is Overgrowth, an enchantment aura that costs 2 and a green. You enchant a land. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 2 additional green to their mana pool. So the enchanted land will tap for 3 mana. So if you put it on the forest, you get 3 green. So I definitely love how much mana that you can produce with the Overgrowth. Alright, next up we're going to talk about Cultivate. Cultivate is a sorcery for 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, and put one of them onto the battlefield and the other in your hand, then shuffle your library. So you just start searching through your deck, you find maybe a forest and a plains, and then you want to put the plains on the battlefield tapped and put the forest in your hand. And if you have not played a land that turn, the land that you put into your hand you can then play for your land for turn. So it is a really good type ramp card. Next up, we have Commander Sphere. Commander Sphere is an artifact that costs 3. It taps to add 1 mana of any color in your commander color's identity, and then sacrifice Commander Sphere, draw a card. So a card that cantrips is actually pretty nice to be able to have, in addition to being able to give you mana fixed kind of mana in ramp. Next up is a card that does identically what Cultivate does, and that is Kodama's Reach. Kodama's Reach is sorcery arcane for 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put one on the battlefield tapped and the other in your hand, then shuffle. Now this card, if you do play a lot with the Kamigawa cards, excuse me, the Splice into Arcane, or cards that arcane spells and stuff like that, can actually make a significant difference if you do have a heavy Kamigawa from back in the day, not Neon Dynasty, that's going to be coming up, because we're not sure how they're going to do any kind of mechanics and stuff like that. So at the time of this recording, the old set, like Champions of Kamigawa and things like that, from way back in the day in Magic's history, when you have Splice into Arcane and stuff like that, your arcane spells actually can make a really big difference. So I definitely just wanted to note that out, especially with the Kamigawa set that's going to be coming out in Neon Dynasty. There may be a return to the Splice into Arcane mechanic, which I would personally love because I thought it was a really good mechanic. But at the time of this recording, I just wanted to mention that the arcane part of the spell can make a difference in a very niche type deck. Alright, next up we have Ronus's Monument. Ronus's Monument is a legendary artifact that costs 3. And green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample till end of turn. So even though your green creatures cost less, even if you cast a white creature, the second part of this spell will still go off, and a target creature you control will get +2/+2 and gain trample till end of turn. And to go along with Ronus's Monument, even though it's not technically ramp and producing additional mana and it's a reduction of cost, I'd still wanted to include them in the ramp because they do very similar things. So the next up is Cloud Key. Cloud Key is an artifact that costs 3, and as Cloud Key enters the battlefield, choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Spells of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. So this deck does have a lot of enchantments, so you could choose enchantments cost 1 less. And then Ronus's Monument you obviously is for green creatures, so maybe you want something for creatures and something for enchantments to help reduce costs, or maybe you just want a big reduction in creatures. Either way, Cloud Key is definitely able to help you on whatever you need, whether it be at the time or what you want in general, to be able to have a reduction of cost. So that wraps up this part, And so the next part we'll go into is creature tokens, because if we have Populate, we need to have the tokens. Alright, now getting into the creature token cards, most of them will be Centaur creature tokens or Enchantment Centaur creature tokens, with one exception for a different kind of creature token in the deck. Because we really, in this deck building, we could just start throwing a bunch of different kinds of creature tokens to then be able to populate them, but I really wanted to have a great focus on centaurs. So yes, this deck could be improved onto throwing in various other creature tokens, but I really did, again, want to focus on centaurs in this deck. So the first up for creating creature tokens is Fated Intervention. Fated Intervention costs 2 and 3 green for an instant. Put 2 3/3 green Centaur enchantment creature tokens onto the battlefield. If it is your turn, scry 2. So this one definitely has the temptation to want to play it during your turn, but again, you don't have to play it during your turn, and you can, be totally tapped out or no creatures on the battlefield, and then someone wants to just come in and swing at you. You can play this to create your 2 bodies to then be able to block or whatever you need to do. So that definitely is a possibility. But again, if you want to play it during your turn, you are able to give the additional benefit of scrying too. Next one is a split card. Not only is it a split card, but it has fuse, so you can play both halves of the card at the same time. And that is Alive and Well. Alive is 3 and a green for a sorcery. Put a 3/3 green Centaur creature token onto the battlefield. The other half is Well. Well costs 1 white for a sorcery. You gain 2 life for each creature you control. And then the fuse is you may cast one or both halves of this card from your hand. So, excuse me, if you pay 3 a green and a white, ta-da! You get a 3/3 green Centaur creature token and gain at minimum 2 life. Next up is Call of the Conclave. Call of the Conclave is a sorcery for a green and a white. And it just simply says, create a 3/3 green Centaur creature token. So pay 2 to get a 3/3 that you're then able to help populate and produce multiple copies of. That is great. Next up we have Centaur Glade, 3 and 2 green for an enchantment. And it says, for 2 and 2 green, put a 3/3 green Centaur creature token into play. So it is a mana dump. That you're able to just dump your mana into this and be able to possibly create multiple Centaur creature tokens if you don't have any kind of recurring populate way to do so at the time, or your commander. Next up, we have a creature. It is Centaur's Herald. It's an elf scout that costs 1 for a 0/1. And for 2 and a green and sacrifice Centaur's Herald, put a 3/3 green Centaur creature token onto the battlefield. So we have ways to double that token coming on the battlefield. If we have several populate cards and no creature tokens, it allows us to be able to get those creature tokens onto the battlefield to then populate. Next up, we have Conclave Cavalier for 2 green, 2 white, so identical casting cost of our commander as long as there's no commander tax. It is a Centaur Knight, 4/4. Whenever it has Vigilance, and then whenever it dies, create 2 2/2 green and white Elf Knight creature tokens with Vigilance. So this is a Centaur, but it does not create Centaurs. So this is that one exception that you're producing non-Centaur creatures, and typically I don't try to populate these cards I typically try to populate the Centaurs because there is other synergies with other cards in the deck that would prefer a 3/3 over a 2/2. Next up, we have Fresben Raiders. It is a Centaur warrior for 5 and a green for a 5/5. It also has Inspired, so whenever it becomes untapped, you may pay 2 and a green. Whenever you do, put a 3/3 green Centaur Enchantment creature token onto the battlefield. So again, the Centaur Enchantment creature token is an enchantment, so as well as a creature, so it can definitely help benefit if you have the Sanctum Weaver out. Last but not least, for the creating creature tokens, is the Vitu-Ghazi Guildmage for a green and a white for a 2/2, so a 2/2 for 2. It's a Dryad Shaman, and it has pay 4, a green and a white. Put a 3/3 green Centaur creature token onto the battlefield. And then for 2, a green and a white, Populate. So spend a lot more mana to be able to get that creature token, but once you have it out there, you're able to copy and create an identical version of that creature token for 2 less than when you just create it out of nowhere. And because it has Populate, that's a great way to lead into the next section for Populate. Alright, now the cards that have Populate. Populate, definitely a overlooked or overshadowed type mechanic that I personally enjoy, and Centaurs were a big reason why I wanted to do for what I wanted a Populate deck to be. So I really wanted Centaurs, and I wanted to be able to create additional Centaurs, and Populate was a great mechanic. And how I build the decks is actually a little bit backwards than most people. I have a concept or idea that I want in a deck. And then what I try to do is find a commander that will fit that idea, instead of finding a commander and then cards to go around the commander. So even so in my decks, that if the commander's taken out, the deck has this core idea of what it is trying to do. So even without the commander, it does not crumble on what the deck's trying to do. And speaking of commander, the first card in Populate is the commander of the deck, and that is Tristani, Celesnia's Voice. It is a legendary creature Dryad for 2 green and 2 white. For a 2/5 creature, it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So typically in this deck, there's so many 3 toughness or 3/3 creatures that usually you'll end up gaining 3 life. But with Populate, creating the creature tokens, you're going to be able to gain quite a bit of life in a creature token type deck. And then the second part is for 1, a green and a white tap, you Populate. So every turn you could Populate and be able to get additional creatures. So I definitely like the fact that the commander itself, it's one with a big butt with 5 toughness, and being able to Populate helps you then generate more life, so you get way more value out of your creatures that you're populating. Because now, not only am I creating another body on the field, I'm also gaining life. So that is definitely a great thing to be able to do. Next up, we have Celesnia Eulogist. Celesnia Eulogist is a Centaur Druid for 2 green for a 3/3, so a 3/3 for 3. It has for 2 and a green, exile target creature card from a graveyard, then Populate. So if you see someone with some kind of graveyard recursion where they want to reanimate their creatures to put them on the battlefield, you could say, actually, in response, I'm going to go ahead and pay this 2 green. I'm going to exile your creature from your graveyard that helps stop your opponent, because it's a good mana dump. to be able to eliminate creatures from other players' graveyards, and then you're populating, so then instead of them getting a creature from the graveyard, you get an additional creature on your side of the field. So I definitely like that, to be able to go wide as well as disrupting an opponent with any possible graveyard recursion or reanimation type effect. Next up, we have Wayfaring Temple. No, this is cards not associated with Wayfare. But Wayfaring Temple, it is a creature elemental. It costs 1 green and a white for a star creature. A Wayfaring Temple's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. This is a token deck, so going wide, it's going to help increase the power and toughness of this creature. And then whenever Wayfaring Temple deals combat damage to a player, you populate. So, if you deal damage with this thing, you get to go ahead and make another creature as long as you already have a creature token, and then it becomes even stronger. And then it'll just keep adding the effect, and then if you give this thing trample, it will continually be able to do that damage and be able to just grow like crazy. So this thing is actually a really good card in the deck, and for only costing 1 a green and a white, it's not hard to get this thing out. Alright, next up we have Druid's Deliverance. Druid's Deliverance is basically like a fog for an instant. It costs 1 and a green. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn. And then populate. So, not only is it like, there's a festival card that does the same thing for 1 and a green. That you take no combat damage this turn. There's a few other cards that same cost. But this has the added benefit to populate. So especially already being a token-heavy type strategy by going wide, you prevent all combat damage that's dealt to you, so you don't need to block with your creatures, so it can help save your creatures, and then you get to populate to create another creature. So not only is your life total saved from any kind of damage, but then you get a creature out of it on top of that for no additional cost versus the other spells that you can compare to this. Next up, we have Sundering Growth for 2 hybrid of a green or a white. It's an instant that says destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this we've also seen for typically in green, and even as well as white, like disenchants and stuff like that, for destroy target artifact or enchantment. But this has that added benefit again of populate. So even if you don't have a creature token, these cards like Druid's Deliverance and Sundering Growth both still have some kind of ability that other cards like it will also do. So yeah, you may not be able to populate, but they're still effective on what they do with not having that additional mana cost to be able to then populate on top of everything else. Next up, we have Reborn Defenses. It's an instant, costs 2 and a white. First off, you populate. And now, obviously, that part of the spell is going to fizzle if you don't have any creature tokens, which is fine. And then creatures you control are indestructible this turn. That's awesome. That is a heroic intervention, and this card is so much cheaper than heroic intervention. Because we're playing white, the Reborn Defenses is awesome. If someone tries to board wipe 2 and a white, I not only create an additional creature, but then all my creatures are safe. So I'm not losing my creatures. I'm actually gaining a creature and safe from a board wipe for the most part. Now, like Toxic Deluge or other things that have like Exile or Return All to the Hand, obviously Indestructible is not going to help you with those. For most board wipes to destroy creatures, to make them indestructible, it makes it one step harder for your opponents to then try to clear your board, especially when you start going wide and it just gets crazy and you have this massive army that's just going crazy and coming at you. This card is actually really great. Next up, a very simple Populate card. It is Wake the Reflections for 1 white for a sorcery, and you just populate. That's it. 1 mana Populate, which is the cheapest Populate in the deck. I have a 3/3 Centaur creature token. I pay 1 white, now I have 2. Alright, next up we have Full Flowering. This one is sweet. For XX and in green for a sorcery, you populate X times. Now, the XX, the X's have to be the same. You can't say 1X is 2, 1X is 1, and then the green. No, they'd either both be 1 or both be 2. And when they're identical, the cost of one of those X's is what the X is referring to. So let's just say I paid 2 for each X in a green, so a total of 5 mana. So 2 for X, 2 for X in green. X is not equal to 4. X is only equal to 2 for how many times I would populate. So I know that can get confusing logically to some. But no, only the value of one of those X's, because they have to be of the same mana value when paid, is what you get for the effect of X and the ability of the card. But to be able to potentially dump a lot of mana into this, to be able to populate over and over and over and over and over again, and now you're able to swarm the field almost out of nowhere. So this is great. Next up, a super strong Populate card is Song of the World Soul for 4 and 2 white. It's an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, you populate. So I could cast a populate spell, and I populate because I played a spell. So you're able to then start going crazy with the type of cards or the number of tokens that you have on the battlefield to have you go wide really fast. And last for the Populate is Growing Ranks for 2 and a hybrid of green-white and green-white. Green or white, green or white. So total of 4 for the mana value. It's an enchantment, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you populate. So you don't need to keep playing a spell or activating an ability. This one is just an automatic, it's your upkeep, you populate. You don't have any creature tokens, obviously it won't do anything. But then if you get another creature token, then it comes back to your upkeep. Now bam, now you get another one. So it's a really good card in this deck specifically. Alright, and then next up we're going to go over the other spells or enchantments or the other cards in the deck that are not lands that help in one way or another with what this deck is trying to do. So let's go ahead and go over those. Alright, so Populate is a great way to be able to create additional creature tokens. Now, we also know things like Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Primal Vigor. They're also really good cards, and they do have a higher price tag, but we don't want to put too many of them in there, because we do have the Populate mechanic already in the deck on a variety of different ways to get additional creatures, and we don't have a vast array of cards that produce the creature tokens. So what I wanted to do for the doubling effect is actually in white, and that is Anointed Procession. Anointed Procession is an enchantment that costs 3 and a white, If an effect would create one or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. So when I play a card that creates any number of tokens, I create twice that many. When I populate, I will now end up getting 2 creature tokens every time that I populate, because populate I create a single token copy of a token creature. So now I get to get or receive 2 of them. So it helps double the effectiveness of populate, which I really like. Next up is Second Harvest. It's an instant for 2 and 2 green. For each token you control, create a token copy of that permanent. So this is for all tokens. This does not just apply to creature tokens. So in some manner, if I somehow end up getting like treasure tokens or something of that manner, or someone ends up giving me like they blow the field, or they end up giving me like an elephant creature token or beast creature token or anything like that, I'm able to double those. So I love that about the versatility and the timing that you can play Second Harvest, because it's an instant that you're able to just double your creature tokens. So yeah, this is definitely a great card in the deck. Next up, we have Pattern of Rebirth. Pattern of Rebirth is definitely in a category of my favorite cards, and eventually I will make a video of some of my top favorite cards, because I know you may hear in several videos about me talking about some of my favorite cards, so I definitely want to kind of bunch those all together in some kind of future video. I'm not sure when it would be, but I do eventually want to make a video of my favorite cards. But Pattern of Rebirth. Pattern of Rebirth is an enchantment aura, or oldly called enchant creature, for 3 and a green. When enchanted creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller may search his or her library for a creature card and put that card into play. If they do, shuffle the library. So I could put it on a Centaur creature token. You kill the Centaur creature token. Now I can possibly search for like Stonehoof Chieftain and just throw a big boy right on the battlefield. It's great to search out whatever you need for the moment. Next up is Elemental Bond enchantment for 2 and a green. It says, whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This card is phenomenal with the Centaur creature tokens in specific, because they have 3 power. So every time you populate, with the exception of those little dinky vigilance elves, you're going to be able to draw a card every time you populate or create creature tokens, and this card becomes super good in this deck. Next up, we have Colossal Majesty for 2 and a green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. So anytime that we put that +1/+1 counter on one of the 3/3s, this is pretty easy to be able to have multiple creatures with power 4 or greater to be able to then draw a card with Colossal Majesty. Next up, we have Mirari's Wake. So this is actually another card to be able to do exactly that. Creatures you control get +1/+1, so they will be 4 power. And then whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced. It costs 3, a green, and a white. So be able to double your mana is phenomenal. And then, last but not least, on the spells of the deck, we have Cather's Crusade. It's an enchantment that costs 3 and 2 white. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So now that we are starting to go wide, we're also going to be going just as tall as we are wide. So this is great, especially when we populate. It's going to be, everything gets stronger, stronger, and stronger. So this card is a very good card to be able to have in this type of deck. Alright, now we are finally to the lands. So, in the deck, there are 19 forests, 10 plains, and 7 non-basic lands for a total of 36 lands in the deck. 36 lands is definitely in a really good spot for your mana base. And now let's go ahead and go over those 7 non-basic lands and kind of see what those exactly do, because not all of them just produce mana. So, first off, let's go ahead and look at Mosswort Bridge. Mosswort Bridge has Hideaway, so when this land enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield tapped. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Now, normally just seeing that part may not make a lot of sense, but you can also tap to add green to mana pool. But here's where the exiled card comes into play. For a green and tap, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have power 10 or greater. So when you start going wide, they are usually with 3/3 creatures, and if they all get +1/+1 or have counters on them, 3 creatures is going to probably get you there. So this is actually a pretty simple and easy way to be able to get that whatever kind of card you had exiled out into play. Next up, we have Command Tower. Command Tower is pretty much an auto-include in any non-mono colored deck. Command Tower just simply says tap, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So basically any of your commander's identity and any colors that they have, you could tap it for whatever that color is. But it does have to be a color though. Next up is Unclaimed Territory. It comes in the battlefield, choose a creature type. In this case, it's probably going to be a Centaur. Tap, add colorless to your mana pool, or tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. So if I say Centaur and I have a white Centaur in my hand, I can use this for a white mana. Or if it's green, I could do for green. Or if I have like a green-white creature and I already have a way to get one kind of mana, I can get the other kind of mana. So it definitely helps me with what mana I need to have for those creatures. Next up was a card I actually added later on in the deck. And I'm really glad I was able to add it into the deck and test it out before making this video to see that it was actually a really, really good idea to add this card to the deck in the non-basic lands, and that is Gavin Township. Gavin Township, you can tap to add 1 to your mana pool, which is totally fine. But the other part is you can pay 2 a green and a white and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So this is like Cathar's Crusades, except you don't need a creature to come into play. You just put mana into this, tap it, and everything gets a +1/+1 counter. So I really do like Gavin Township in the deck, and it is very sweet, especially combined with like Stonehoof Chieftain making your stuff indestructible with trample, and then they just get taller and then swing for more damage, and you see where that's going. So it's really actually a good card. Next up, it's almost similar to Gavin Township, and that is Oran Reef the Vastwood. It does enter the battlefield tapped. You could tap to add green, or you could tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature you control that entered the battlefield this turn. It does have to be a green creature, so if you have a green-white creature, it's still considered a green creature, but if a creature is just straight up white, it will not get the +1/+1 counter. Next up, we have Temple of Plenty. Temple of Plenty enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 1, and then it taps for a green or a white. And last but not least, for the last card in this deck to finish out all 100 cards, is Thriving Grove. Thriving Grove enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, choose a color other than green. And then tap, add green or 1 mana of the chosen color. So in this deck, it will be white. Alright, now let's go ahead and get on into the stats of the deck. Because now some people might be wondering about the mana curve and how much of what colors of the deck and rarities and stuff like that. So the mana curve, we start off with a 1 CMC card. We peak at 3 and we go down pretty well. This is probably one of the most ideal type mana curves. This deck definitely runs consistently because of this type of mana curve. The next we have the color breakdown. We have 62 green mana symbols and cards in the deck. So that's why our green-based lands or green-based mana is higher than white. And then we have 22 symbols of white in the deck. So we definitely try to make sure that our mana base is adjusted accordingly, because we don't want to have too many of one color over the other when there's almost 3 times as many green over white in this deck specifically. Then we also want to look at the deck colors. For commons, all the way to the left is 57. Uncommons, we have 21. Moving to the rares, we also have 21. And the only mythic card we have in the deck would be our commander. So that is just a quick stats of the Centaur deck. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I definitely appreciate all of my viewers to be able to view my videos, leave comments. I really do appreciate that. It helps me as a content creator, especially with comments, and giving me feedback, whether like or dislike anything, to be able to help grow my channel. So I do appreciate all of you that are watching this video. And if you haven't already, definitely be sure to hit the thumbs up button. Go ahead and drop a comment on the video and just tell me what you think. Any thoughts on the cards to maybe add or take out of the deck, or just overall thoughts of what you think of the channel. And definitely hit that subscribe bell with a notification bell. That way you can be notified anytime I put a new video up on my channel. So definitely thank you, and as always, have a great day. And definitely be sure to check out this video and others on my channel, and hit that subscribe button right there in the corner if you haven't already.